Everybody. First of all, I should say thank you to Natalia and Boomin Media for the invitation to be here on a glorious summer's day in Moscow. This is something of a landmark for the Holmes Report. It's the first time that we have partnered on an event in this part of the world. It's very exciting because the Russian market obviously is growing at an impressive rate, and public relations here is becoming more sophisticated and more in line with what we are seeing in the rest of the world. And so I'm hoping that the trends that I see globally will resonate with the people in this room. If you don't already see all of these things happening, I suspect that you will begin to see them happening in the next year or two, and can at least be a little better prepared for them than your colleagues in the West were. I should start by issuing a quick disclaimer. I have been writing about public relations now for nearly 30 years. But I have never worked a day in my life as a public relations person. I will be very happy if I go to my grave making the same claim. I have no desire to cross over to your side of the business. It's much easier being on my side. That might raise the question of why I have the hubris to stand in front of you and tell you what's going on in your own business. I have a wonderful quotation that I use in my defense. Somebody once said, if you steal ideas from one person, it's plagiarism. If you steal ideas from more than one person, it's research. I do a lot of research. All of these ideas are stolen from the people I meet with every day. And the one thing that is readily apparent to me, two things really. The first thing is that the pace of change in our business has never been faster than it is today. The second thing is that it will never be this slow again. Things are moving faster and they are accelerating at an alarming pace. And our industry, I believe, finds itself at something of a crossroads as a result. What I think is happening is that all around the PR business, we are seeing a convergence of disciplines that were, until relatively recently, quite separate. So we are seeing PR and marketing, PR and advertising, PR and digital social media, and even PR and management consulting coming together. That means that if you're on the agency side of the business, you are going to be competing in the world ahead with ad agencies, with digital firms. If you're in the public affairs business, you might be competing with law firms. If you're doing high-end strategic value-added work, you might be competing with management consultancies like McKinsey and Price Waterhouse. But your competitive landscape is changing dramatically. If you're on the client side of the business, then as a CCO, you have to, I think, be very concerned that what you do could easily be absorbed by or integrated into the marketing function. I believe that if you're a CMO today, if you're the head of marketing at a large organization, you need to understand more about public relations than you ever did before. You have to understand employee communications, because building a brand today starts inside out. It starts with making sure that your employees are aligned behind the brand. You have to understand CSR and cause-related marketing, because the kind of halo that good works can give to your brand is very important. You need to understand crisis management, because a crisis can derail your brand. You need to understand the legislative environment, because government can pass laws that make it incredibly difficult to either produce or market your goods and services. So if you're a responsible CMO today, you need to understand employee comms, you need to understand CSR, you need to understand crisis, you need to understand public affairs. These are all things that 2 or 3 years ago were clearly part of corporate communications, but today they have to be part of marketing too. And so what we're seeing, I think, is an environment in which the background that you come from and the discipline that you grew up in doesn't matter. What matters is how smart you are. If you are smarter as a PR agency than the guys in the ad agencies, or I guess if this room is anything to go by, the girls in the ad agencies, if you're smarter than the women who work in digital and social, if you're smarter than the women who work at integrated agencies, then you will win. If you are in-house, like Olga, smarter than the people who work in marketing, then I think you have a very real chance for corporate communications to take over the marketing function. But if you're not smarter, or if your CEO doesn't trust you as much, then the opposite is true, and you will find yourself under threat. And so what I want to do over the next 10, 15 minutes is talk about some of the things that I think we as public relations people need to do in order to become smarter. And the first thing we need to do is we need to forget about the traditional definition of public relations. We, at the Holmes Report, just partnered with a group of global organizations to produce a communications report looking at the state of the industry. And one of the things that was apparent was that corporate communications departments around the world are no longer exclusively focused on earned media. Now, that may sound obvious to you, but 5 or 10 years ago, our focus in the US and in the UK, public relations was very much synonymous with earned publicity. We have begun to move beyond that. We have begun to embrace new channels, social media, obviously, shared media, owned media, we're building websites and Facebook pages of our own, and paid media. But we have to get past this idea that earned media is either the only legitimate channel for public relations or even the most important channel. We have to forget about the idea that the end product of public relations is media coverage, that the end product of public relations is a third-party endorsement. Those things will continue to be important, but what is really important, what I think public relations has always been about, is delivering as an end product the relationship. That's what the words public relations mean to me, building a relationship with people. And relationships are the product that PR people create or manage that are truly valuable. So what we have to focus on is building great relationships with consumers, employees, shareholders, communities, legislators, regulators, and the media. But those relationships are and should be the ultimate goal of everything we do. Now, that means that we have to, I think, step back a little from the idea that public relations and communications are the same thing. Because I have a concern about the term communications as it pertains to our business. And my concern is this. You don't build a relationship based on what you say to people. You build a relationship based on how you behave towards people. And that leads me to the next point about how our function has to change. We have to go from being spokespeople, mouthpieces for the organizations we represent, and focus instead on playing a role in policy for organizations. We have to have a role not only in what companies say, but in what they do. We have to advise management on real strategic business decisions, not just how to communicate those decisions. And crises always show us how this works. So the biggest crisis that we covered last year involved Volkswagen and the lying about their emissions tests, which I'm going to assume most of you are familiar with. Now, whenever something like that happens, I question what the role of public relations in that organization was. So there are three possibilities about this decision within Volkswagen to create a dishonest system. The first possibility is that nobody even bothered to ask the PR people, that PR people weren't involved in the decision-making process anyway. First of all, this is an engineering decision. It's an environmental decision. It's not a PR decision. So we don't need the PR people there. And if we called them, one of them would probably talk to one of their friends on the German automotive newspaper. And the next thing you know, we'd have leaked the story. So we won't talk to the PR people at all. The second possibility is that they talked to the PR people, and the PR people thought it was a great idea. Let's go ahead and cheat on our emissions tests. Nobody will ever find out. The third possibility is that they asked the PR people. The PR people said, this is a really stupid idea. We are living in an age of transparency. We're living in an age in which everything that you think, say, and do will eventually find its way onto the front page of the newspapers. Don't do anything that's going to make us look dishonest, disreputable, that's going to damage our reputation. Of those three possibilities, the second one, that the PR people thought it was a great idea, is, I suspect, really unlikely. I hope it's really unlikely. If it's true, the PR people should be fired immediately. The other two possibilities, PR people weren't asked, or PR people were asked and then ignored, are just as bad. And if I was a PR person in Volkswagen and one of those two things was true, I would write my letter of resignation the next day, because you are working for an organization that does not take public relations seriously, which means it doesn't take you seriously, which means you should go somewhere where you are respected and held in high regard. Don't continue working for an organization that has nothing but contempt for what you do. Go work for someplace that values what you do. Now, my suspicion is that of all of those three things, the first is the most likely. Nobody called public relations people into the room. Nobody even thought that this was a PR problem. In fact, let me ask you quickly, how many of you think that if there was something like that going on in your company, you would be told about it and asked your opinion about it as PR people? Okay, that's moderately encouraging. I think that that's a good sign that there are 7 or 8 hands in the audience that went up. But the reality is that in most organizations, even most sophisticated Western European, American, British organizations, PR is still not brought into the room. I believe that every time a decision has the potential to impact your company's reputation or your company's relationships, PR people should be part of the decision-making process. And we have to stop waiting patiently outside the door to be invited in. And we have to start either knocking on the door or kicking it in. We have to demand, we have to explain to management that if our part of the business is not taken seriously, they are going to make bad decisions, and bad decisions are much more difficult to clean up than they are to avoid. We should be helping to avoid problems. We also, I think, need to look at the kind of people that we are bringing into our business. And I want to focus on two things. I want to focus on this idea that I have about the PR person of tomorrow and the kind of skills that the PR person of tomorrow will need. And then I want to focus a little bit on the characteristics of the PR person of tomorrow, the sort of personal style that will work in communications going forward. The first thing I should say, we were talking about this yesterday in terms of maybe a generational divide in our business. And the fact of the matter is that as recently as 5 or 10 years ago, 90% of the people who worked in public relations had essentially the same job and the same skill set. Their job was to get media coverage for their clients. Now, some of them did it by writing press releases and sending them to 5,000 newspapers and hoping that 5 of them would write something. Some of them did it by calling up the editorial board of the Wall Street Journal or the Financial Times, but top-end media, and talking one-on-one with reporters. Some of it did it by holding great events and hoping the media would show up and cover them. But most of us were focused on media. That is clearly not going to be the case going forward. And in fact, I would suggest that the majority, or certainly a large number, of the people who grew up in that environment are not going to be able to make the transition from the old world of public relations to the new world of public relations. I would suggest, in fact, that about 1/3 of the people in the PR industry are not going to be fit for purpose for the way this business functions 4 or 5 years ago. And obviously not the people in this room, right? Because you're all here because you want to see how the business is changing, because you're excited about the developments in this business and the new opportunities that it will create. But 3 or 4 years ago, we did a survey of the global PR industry and asked people whether they thought this new environment was an opportunity or a threat. 52% said they thought it was an opportunity. 32% said they thought it was a threat. Those 32%, in all honesty, should pack their bags, go home, decide to take up whatever it is that they have as a hobby and do that instead, because they are going to be no use to their clients, to their management, or to their colleagues in the years ahead. And we need to start looking at replacing those people with people who have a whole different set of skills. And I'll run through quickly some of the skills that I think are important going forward that we don't have enough of in our industry. Number one, and I know we're going to talk about this in a little bit because it's in your survey, data and analytics. There is a very simple equation in this new world. The people with the best data will have the best insight. The people with the best insight will develop the best strategy. The people who develop the best strategy will be the most valuable people on the client's team. If you want to be the most valuable person to your client, you need data. You need to understand how to use big data, how to gather it, how to analyze it, how to extract wisdom from it. And you need to understand how to measure how that data is impacting your business, which means that you would need to understand metrics. Now, if you're like me and most of the people I deal with, you didn't get into PR because you love numbers. You got into PR because you love words, or maybe because you love images. But we need people who understand data and how to crunch it. And those people are going to be very important. Every PR organization, agency, or in-house department is going to need a chief data officer going forward. How many of you have somebody with that title or that role in your organization today? Okay, that's not a 2 hands. That's not atypical. 3 hands. You know, in a group this size, that's probably about average. It has to change. We need people who understand behavioral science. We need people who understand the science of decision making. We have historically, so I spent a lot of time in America. And I have a shorthand way of saying this that really only makes sense in America, but maybe you'll understand. I always say PR people are like Democrats and advertising people are like Republicans. And what I mean is that PR people seem to have this touching faith that if you just present people with the facts, if you just give them all of the information they need to make the right decision, they will go out and make the decision that you want. So if you tell people that 20 million people have gotten insured because of Obamacare, if you tell them that healthcare has gotten cheaper, if you tell them all of this stuff, they will go, Obamacare is a great idea. What Republicans understand is that all of those facts and figures can be beaten by one good story, by telling a story that has an emotional impact, by finding one person whose life is more difficult because of Obamacare and putting him on television and having him tell his personal story. Anecdotes, particularly if they have an emotional component, are more powerful than facts. And we need to understand what it is that changes people's minds. There's a fascinating study that came out a couple of years ago that shows if you take a group of people who think that climate change is a hoax, they don't believe climate change is happening, and you present them with all of the scientific facts about climate change, their opinions change quite dramatically. They become even more convinced that climate change is a lie. The more facts you give them, the more they disbelieve them. We have to understand that the human brain doesn't work the way we would like it to. That means we as an industry have to get better at what I think of as moving images. And I mean moving in the sense of visual, because we're still too much reliant on words rather than images. And I mean moving in terms of emotional, moving people to laughter, moving people to tears, making people feel as well as think. And we have to get better at that. And there is a whole weight of information and behavioral science that can help us do that. I want to spend a second just talking about the visual image thing as well. And I'm going to wrap up in a couple of minutes, I promise. We need to bring in people who are great at content creation across a whole range of disciplines. We need to bring in animators. We need to bring in people who can do data visualization, infographics. We need to bring in videographers. One of the great things about public relations, because we're used to working with small budgets, because we're used to doing things quickly, we can create great, powerful visual images extremely quickly. If you go to an ad agency and say, I want something to introduce this new product, you know, the ad agency will hire the guy who directed Gravity, they'll go to the Bahamas, they'll get 2 beautiful supermodels, they'll put them on a beach, they'll film it in high def, they'll come back, they'll edit it for about 5 months, and then 6 months later, they'll have a perfect 30-second commercial ready to go on television. If you give a PR agency the same problem, they'll get a couple of junior account executives, go out in a field, shoot the whole thing on an iPhone, and have it up on YouTube in raw form 20 minutes later. And you know what? In a world where authenticity is important, in a world where it's more important to be real than to be polished, that's much more powerful. And our ability to do that is a huge asset. Again, advertising people are hamstrung by the idea that their product is an ad. If we can move beyond the idea that our product is a press release and acknowledge that our product is a relationship and we can use any tool we like to build that relationship, then we can go out and do all of these things. In addition to all of that, I want to quickly touch on what I think are the important personal characteristics for PR people going forward. Firstly, courage. You are defined as a counselor by the ability and the willingness to walk into the CEO's office and tell him that he's being an asshole. You do not have to use the word asshole. Well, this is one of the reasons I would make a very bad PR person. But it's when you tell the CEO that he's doing something stupid, that he's about to make a big mistake, that you're really adding value. That takes courage. At the same time as courage, you need empathy. You need the ability to understand how people outside the organization think and feel. Sometimes the least powerful people in the world have the loudest voice today. They have the loudest voice because their very weakness, their very vulnerability makes them attractive on social media. And you can get huge support for people who apparently had no constituency whatsoever. You need to understand those people. Even if you don't agree with them, you need to be able to bring their worries and concerns and fears into the corporation and make everybody else understand them. You need integrity. If public relations is not authentic and ethical and truthful and transparent, it will have no credibility. If you don't have credibility, you can't build a relationship. And finally, maybe most important, you need curiosity. Curiosity, I believe, is the great characteristic of PR people. The desire to learn something new every day. To go into every day hoping that you find out something you didn't know before. Whether it's something about your product, something about your consumers, something about your employees, something about your management. But that curiosity and desire to keep learning is going to set apart those people who continue to practice public relations like it was 1989, and those people who practice public relations the way it's going to be practiced in 2020 and beyond. You have to keep learning. I believe we are at the most exciting time for public relations people that I have ever seen. I believe the opportunity for us to add value to the organizations for which we work has never been greater. But in order to take advantage of that opportunity, we need to embrace change. We need to devour change hungrily. We need to be excited by change. And I hope by the end of this day's conference, everybody in this room will feel the same way. Thank you.